Welcome to Pensar Basketball Live, and today we are going to be ranking every single draft prospect, every single draft pick in Raptors history, all the way from the 46th pick all the way to the first. It's like an all-time draft, redraftables, if you will. Now, we'll introduce the methodology, but first, we're also going to be talking a little bit about the 2023 draft. As you can tell from the tone of this channel, we've been talking a lot about the Grady Dick pick and how he fits in with the Raptors. And I went back and I listened to a little bit of Darko Rajakovic talking about what he wants to do. Also did a little bit of film study on TCU version of Desmond Bane. And I want to refresh a take, and I want to say a few things about how I think Grady can fit in with the Raptors. So if you're new around here, please hit subscribe. Hit the like button on your way in. It really does help the algorithm and helps more people see this video. Okay, so let's start. First and foremost, there's this. Sorry, I'm putting the mic in front of my face here. This is always an issue. Always an issue. Okay, so here, I don't know if you guys have seen Hoop Intellect. It's one of my favorite channels on YouTube for breakdowns and draft study. And this is Hoop Intellect's weaknesses for Desmond Bane. Tell me if this seems a little bit familiar to you, because it's oddly familiar to me. These are the identical weaknesses for Grady Dick. And I was listening to Darko Rajakovic's interview with Will Liu, and he was talking about how he worked with Desmond Bane to make him better. And one of the things that you realize when you watch TCU film on Desmond Bane, and I didn't follow that much of college basketball back then, so I may have caught one game and a couple of scouting reports on him, and I didn't know too much about him as a prospect. But one of the things you see is you see some defensive potential. You do see a willingness to guard, at least. You see a willingness to work on defense. So you think that, okay, there's some seeds there. He may not be great at it. He doesn't have the greatest lateral quickness, and he doesn't have great length. But at the very least, he has shown a willingness and a commitment to that end. There was also some, let's say, budding potential as a pick and roll playmaker. So it's not like it was completely barren. It's not like he came into the league and boom, he just became a playmaker. He wasn't a non-playmaker. And it's the same thing with a lot of guys who've developed under Darko is they had hints and bits, and then that became honed. So he started talking about, in that interview, he talked about how he worked with Desmond Bane to expand his game out, how he kept things simple. And it got me thinking, is there still some way that he can tap into the wasted potential of some of the Raptors draft picks and some of the Raptors young players who we as fans perhaps believe have not developed as well as we would have liked them to over the last few years. Guys like Malachi Flynn, guys like Delano Banton, Precious Achiuwa, perhaps even Christian Koloko. Is there some expanded room to grow? And I just want to preface, it's not inconsequential to waste those early years of development. It's not like what happened to Josh Jackson can just be undone because you grab him at 25, 26 and be like, okay, clean slate. No, these years don't come back. For young prospects that are just developing at the age of 18, 17, these years are so critical up until the age of 25. And it's very rare for prospects to get drastically better after that. And so you do hope that there is still some room to redeem the careers of guys like Delano Banton, Malachi Flynn, Precious Achiuwa. So let's talk a little bit about how Darko does this. Number one, he will effectively limit the role, but keep an eye on the bigger picture. And I really like that part of his interview because it felt like this is the type of thing that can actually help somebody succeed. You simplify the role while not diminishing the player and relegating the player to that role forever. You give them a path line. You give them a pathway to becoming the type of player that they envision themselves as. You have to incorporate them in their development. And I think that this really does engage a prospect. It can help them buy into their role. It's one thing to be able to tell Grady Dick, hey, I want you to come in for 20 minutes a night. I want you to make clean reads. I want you to guard as hard as you can, and I want you to be a menace on the glass. I want you to be the best rebounder and the hustle guy. And if you do this, by the next year, we're going to expand this out to pick and roll. And then by year 3, we're going to try to get you to fringe all-star level. but you're going to have to do this work in order to build yourself up. And in those 3 years, I want you to hit the gym hard. I want you to build up your strength, your core strength, because you're going to need to. And if he buys into that and you buy into that and you're on the same page, then this can work. This can work so well. And I was thinking about something else that Darko said in that interview, where he said it really doesn't work if they're not humble and they don't accept it. And it got me thinking about the profile, like the psychological profile of a Grady Dick. This is a player who came into a stacked Kansas team and just bought into his role. This is a player who happens to have grown up as the youngest of a few siblings. He was the baby of the family. He's a player who not only has the hunger and the drive and the will to, excel, he also has all of the tools that are like baseline tools to succeed in the NBA. There's nothing overly glaring. You can point to a lack of burst and a lack of elite lateral quickness, but I mean, need I point you to 3 of the 5 best players in the NBA, 2 of the 5 best players in the NBA, Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic, and neither one of those guys have either of those things. They're not explosive, nor do they have elite lateral quickness. So the pathway to, hey, Grady, you want to be an all-star, do this thing for 3 years and we'll get you there, I think that's an easy sell. And I think that there's also an element of credibility when you come at it from, I did this with Devin Booker and Desmond Bane, and look how far they went. The buy-in factor has to be there. And listening to Gary Sr.'s interview with the fan morning, it just felt like maybe whatever Nick Nurse was asking these guys to do, it didn't feel like they were buying into it. So we can argue that the Raptors brought in the wrong people. We can say that they had the wrong coach, or we can simply say that neither the coach nor the players are really at fault. There's just a disconnect in terms of how they communicate and an unwillingness or perhaps incompatibility in terms of getting them on the same page. Now, let's talk, enough rambling. We've got some people into the live now. Let's talk about the 46 greatest draft picks. I don't think number 1 is going to be who you think it's going to be. And I don't think that number 46 is probably exactly who you think it's going to be. But I want to add some qualifiers here. Obviously, you're going to find more talent at the top of the draft. Obviously, you're going to find a little bit more talent in more talented drafts, right? Just overall, if it's a weak draft and you pick 6th overall, I'm not penalizing you. It matters to me during this ranking who went right after you or in your range, like if there was a clear miss. It does not, however, matter to me how long you stayed a Raptor. I'm just thinking of this as how great was the prospect, where were they picked relative to the expected value of their draft position. So obviously, if Pascal Siakam goes 27th and he has the career that he's had, he's going to be ranked more favorably than a different version of Pascal Siakam who went 9th. Similarly, when we think about value in the draft, most of us gravitate towards 2nd round picks. We think about Gilbert Arenas, Nikola Jokic, Manu Ginobili. We think, wow, but you have to look at a guy like Pascal Siakam at 27th and say that's incredible value, regardless of whether it's a 1st round pick or 2nd round pick. It's incredible value to grab at 27, especially when he was mocked, sometimes at 40, 45. But you could also look at a guy like Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James, and say that's elite value to get the number 1 pick. So it's a little bit fluid, and it's not exactly scientific, but I'll provide justifications across the board. So let's start with what I consider are the worst draft picks in Raptors history. I call this wasted. All right. We'll start at 46 with Rafael Rougeau, picked right before Andre Iguodala. And quite frankly, I mean, it would be hard to imagine if we did this redraft to 2004 redraft that he's a 1st rounder. I don't think he gets drafted if we do this redraft again. He was an older prospect. The thought process behind this between Jack McCluskey and Rob Babcock, I really believe that because there's so many extenuating factors that make this pick worse than it was. Number 1, you were kind of capped out. You had this budding superstar, not budding superstar. You had an established superstar in Vince Carter who was disgruntled, and you had an opportunity to put the exact type of player next to him that he needed to play next to in Andre Iguodala. And for some insane reason. The justification was even stupider because it's a hockey town. We're going to love Rafael Ujo. And it was such a terrible pick. Now, Alexander Rajakovic. I cannot say enough about picking a guy in the lottery because he's tall who played at community college. It is by far one of the most ridiculous picks. And honestly, thank God for Rafael Ujo because this could be one of the greatest draft busts of all time. Michael Bradley, 17th overall in 2001. I mean, 2001 was not the strongest draft class, but you have to argue that you could have gotten a little bit more value out of this. And it is still a mid-first rounder. It's just terrible value. DeAndre Daniels, who never played for the Toronto Raptors, picked 2 picks ahead of Jeremy Grant and picked ahead of Nikola Jokic. I don't know what's worse, picking Bruno Caboclo, who barely cracked an NBA rotation ever in the first round, or DeAndre Daniels, who had a lot of the same, if you want to talk about, we need a wing with some length and some shooting, my God, Jeremy Grant's right there. And, how you miss it, I don't know. But he wasn't a bad player at UConn. I certainly understand it, but yikes, that's a tough pick by Masai Ujiri. DeAndre Hewlett from the, I wasn't a Raptor fan very intently in 2000, but nothing to show for that. Ramon Van der Heer, I do remember this pick, and there was a lot of hype around it. And believe it or not, he never played in the NBA. Eden Babic and Tomislav Zubcic. The Raptors have really, really struck out with Slavic players. I mean, it's hilarious. I actually know Tomislav, and yeah, he never played. 3 years later, his draft rights were traded. Xavier Thomas, a player who is so irrelevant, unfortunately for him, despite being picked, he's picked 59th. That his Wikipedia page does not even include what happened to him after he was drafted to the Raptors. And the pick was traded to Brooklyn. Whatever happened with that, I don't know. I don't remember what it was traded for. It was very obscure. The first of 2 Florida State prospects on this list, Solomon Alabi. The memes, he was a heavy-footed player. He was picked 50th overall in 2010 by Bryan Colangelo. I got to be honest, the jump shot was promising, just didn't really stick. The defensive issues were real. The shot blocking did not translate. He was just too slow for the NBA. Tyson Wheeler, the 1998 second round pick and the 47th overall pick there. DeJuan Hernandez. Some people, again, thought that he might have some potential there. At least played some minutes, and just it didn't work out, didn't stick in the NBA. David Johnson, the jury is still out. He's still very young. He could still redeem his career, but it does not feel like, because he did not really participate in the Raptors' main roster last year. I don't know what the pathway is for him to be successful in the NBA. He did get some run during the Tampa season, or was it? I believe it was the Tampa season, 2021. Yeah, I liked it. Sorry, I think it was the year after Tampa. I liked the pick when we made it. He was much higher than 47 on most draft boards. I think he was rated as early as the late first round for a lot of people. So you definitely see the upside, a guard, a big point guard out of Louisville. And this is just when the Raptors were just taking as many shots at it as they could. They drafted 3 big point guards with Scotty, with Delano, and with David Johnson. And I think too much of a good thing could be a bad thing. Big playmakers are awesome, but I didn't see it. And I've really liked some of his stuff at the 905. I really like him. And it's kind of a weird thing to put him this low on this board, but yeah. Moving on, Chris Jeffries. I think what makes this pick worse than it really is that you traded Kareem Rush out for it, right? So it's kind of a weird situation. I mean, I remember liking Kareem Rush a lot, but to be honest, I really like Chris Jeffries as well. I remember this back in 2002, and some people were comparing him to a poor man's Scottie Pippen, and they really liked him. Like, they really liked him, and he had all these tools. And I will never forget when he finally he got into the game, and you're expecting something, and it didn't happen. the analytics are going to matter to me a little bit here. The box plus minus less so than the value of a replacement. Obviously, if you're picking a guy in the first round, you don't want to be seeing negative or zero value of replacement. And all of these players had at minimum zero contribution in the league or absolute zero or below zero value of replacement across the board. Okay, moving on to bad value. Oof. Okay. Uros Slokar, the 58th pick in 2005, Jalen Harris, who had, that situation, unfortunate, very talented player. Little, sometimes seldom remembered, Jimmy King, 1995, second round pick in the 35th overall. Didn't really stick in the NBA, only played 64 games, but, a member of the Fab Five before Jalen Rose was a Raptor, and it was Jimmy King. Malachi Flynn, it's kind of sad to put him this low, right? But he hasn't really had much of an impact at all. And to be honest, I could fluctuate anywhere from Malachi up till Joey. Like, I think I could put Malachi above Joey Graham. I think I could put Joey Graham below Malachi Flynn. I just look at these guys as prospects and I say, what was right? What was wrong with them as prospects? What was the role? What was, how badly was the development botched, right? And I think with Joey Graham, the shit show that he entered out of Oklahoma State, which was the Toronto Raptors roster at that time, undergoing the shift from, Rob Babcock, the guy who drafted him. And then the next year, the guy who comes in, Bryan Colangelo, isn't super high on him. And, you change coaches and it's just a sort of disruptive situation. With Malachi Flynn, he had consistency. You can argue Nick Nurse maybe didn't like him, didn't like his father. His father didn't like Nick Nurse. His role has been up and down. But guys have at least developed under Nick Nurse and Dwayne Casey. I didn't see a lot of guys develop during that time. So I'm going to give Joey Graham cut him a little bit of slack there. And ditto for Roku Ukic and Andrea Bargnani. Now, Andrea Bargnani is a little bit controversial. The guy directly after him had a phenomenal career in LaMarcus Aldridge. And it's funny because they kind of played the same position, which is the 4-5. And so you can say that not drafting LaMarcus Aldridge next to Chris Bosh is such a disaster. But I put Andrea a little bit higher on this list because, number one, he still managed to be a top 12 player in his draft. He managed to have a 10-year career. And I really do think if you play out his career 15 to 20 different times, this is the worst possible outcome. You come into a team where your natural position is the same position as the best player on the team plays. You're asked to come in as a backup power forward where you thrive because you're playing your natural position. You are, I think, runner-up for Rookie of the Year that year behind Brandon Roy. And at the very least, the immediate return on that was great because the Raptors were a 46 or 47 win team in his rookie year, and they were terrible the year before. And you can say he was a part of it. Like, he was a really big part of why they got better. He contributed to winning in his first year. And then the very second year, suddenly there's a bulk up plan of like, okay, let's be a center now. And people remember him as this really terrible defender. And he just wasn't. Like, I don't know how far defensive analytics are at the time, but I remember him shutting down Dwight Howard, having like better than expected results against guys like Shaq. I think he tried, man. I think he was a good shot blocker. I just think he was just mismanaged, like horribly mismanaged. And it's difficult, like in his rookie year, he had Jorge Garbajosa here. And when Jorge went out, his entire career just changed. Those two were really tight off the court. And to be honest, if you followed this team back then, you would realize how homesick he was and, how unhappy he was here. And, by the third year, they're like, okay, wait, the center thing is not working out. We're going to try to play you at small forward and we're going to bring in Jermaine O'Neal. Like, it's such a screw up of epic proportions. And if you believe that Bryan Colangelo really believed in him as a first overall pick, then there were necessary sacrifices he needed to make to accommodate that, which probably included Chris Bosh getting traded. And if Chris Bosh wasn't going to get traded, then you needed to draft somebody else or trade that pick because there's just no way that those two guys can play together unless, of course, and also like you have to consider wrong era, wrong time, wrong coach, wrong era, wrong time. You imagine Andrea Bargnani in a Mike D'Antoni offense and you're just like, geez, like could he at least have been like a low level, two-time all-star? There's so many things that went wrong for him. He had a great sense for playmaking. He was so talented. So, You understand the pick in hindsight, but you just don't understand the development of it. Rajakovic, another big point guard, had a phenomenal career over in Europe for Split and Tau, and just a really interesting player. Again, the type of player where in a different situation with more opportunity, maybe he succeeds. The minute Rob Babcock drafted him, they also signed Jose Calderon, which was hilarious and so wrong, because then he went over to Europe and Jose came over here and they were playing for the same team. And then eventually when you bring him over, there isn't a real clear pathway for him to succeed because Jose and TJ are splitting minutes ahead of him. And then, he just doesn't cut it. And he's another guy who was sort of homesick and just wanted to go home. So yeah, Delano Banton, the jury is still out, and he's not that old, and he's got all sorts of talent, positional versatility, could still become a really good player. I think the jump shot is going to be the swing skill. I think at some point we're going to have to just accept that he's not a point guard and he's more of a point forward. But I like him. And I don't see why Delano Banton can't move up this list in years to come. Moving on to mixed bag. Charlie Villanueva, number 7. Gosh. It was a reach when it happened. It shocked the world, and he succeeded. For the first year, he put up that 48-point game, and everyone was really excited for a little bit. And to be honest, value of a replacement of 4.7 on his career. He managed to get the big bag with Detroit. It wasn't the strongest draft in the world. 2005 was pretty weak across the board, but picking him at 7 was definitely a reach. And then we have coin toss Ross, Terrence Ross, number 8. This was a pick that the Raptors sort of fell into. They were very much targeting Harrison Barnes that year, and they had very strong expectations that he would fall to them. And when he didn't, they didn't adjust and pick Andre Drummond or someone better. They just went with the next best Harrison Barnes, and it just didn't work out. The thought process of this is actually more alarming because Terrence Ross was an older rookie, and he just, never quite developed. And ironically, both Charlie Villanueva and Terrence Ross have had huge scoring games. And, they both brought 3-point shooting. And for Terrence Ross, at least he was a part of some successful periods of Raptors history before he was traded to Orlando for Serge Ibaka. But I didn't like the pick then. And I got to be honest, I still don't like the pick now. Ed Davis in 2010, the 13th overall pick. One of a couple of times the Raptors have had the 13th overall pick, and they picked Ed Davis out of the University of North Carolina. He had a pretty solid career as a role player. I think this is about the most average 13th overall pick that you could imagine. This is kind of what you expect when you pick 13th. So I don't think it's a bad pick. I don't think it's a good pick. Christian Coloco, a guy who can easily move up this board, and I think Grady Dick is another guy who can easily move up this board. Sorry, I'm just going to turn off my sound for my computer. One sec. So I think Christian Coloco is elite value at 33. I know the centers get devalued in the draft, but I think that immediately his defensive impact alone has me thinking at worst he's a role player, and at best he can be a really good starter in the NBA, and that's just elite value to get at 33. I expect him to move much higher on this list. I expect him to be all the way up to 7, maybe, on this list by the time his career is done. Maybe 6. I think he could be the steal of steals. Just in terms of just his analytic impact, I think he could be a really good player. The offense has a long way to go. There are issues on defense. He's a little bit foul prone. He needs to get stronger, et cetera, et cetera. But man, this guy works so hard, and I wouldn't doubt it for 1 second that he could move up this list. Grady Dick right now at 16. I mean, this is very early. He hasn't played a single game yet, but I think that he has some incredible value to bring into the lineup. I think he can fit really well off the right away. And I think that he is just going to ascend up this list at some point. I think 13th overall is not generally a place where you expect a 1 or 2 time All-Star. And, if he can become a 1 or 2 time All-Star, then certainly the top 10 is well within reach. Norman Powell, traded for Gary Trent Jr., so continues to provide value as Gary Trent continues on. But his career in itself is just very interesting. I think for a 46th overall pick, he has a claim to being one of the greatest second-round picks of all time, or at least one of the 30, 40 greatest second-round picks of all time, picked especially in this range. You usually do not find starter level talent. And he has been a starter level talent, regardless when he's coming off the bench or when he's starting. He's a starter level talent in the NBA. His defense has always been shaky, but his offensive explosion, 3-point shooting, etc., has just been awesome. And he's had some really big playoff performances as well. PJ Tucker, the one that got away, right, in 2006, the Raptors draft Andrea Bargnani first overall. They get PJ Tucker in the second round. And ironically, PJ Tucker had the better career by far. Goes over to Europe, really humbles himself out. A really great example of a guy who didn't get it in his first stint around. He thought he was a little bit better than he should be. And he was really undersized, was 6'4", 6'5", power forward coming out of Texas. And you're like, how the hell is that going to work? He played next to LaMarcus Aldridge, I believe, at Texas. And, is an interesting player. And he's really morphed himself into this 3-and-D guy. And, it's a great success story. Now, the first of a few rookies of the year on this list, 1995, Damon Stoudemire. This was one of those picks that really paid off right away. And if you had told people after his rookie year that he would become one of the greatest, Raptors of all time or something along those lines, I think people probably would have agreed with you. But I think more so than anything, people remember it nostalgically. Those teams were terrible. His numbers were huge, but the teams were terrible. And then he went to Portland, and one could argue that he was a good part of the Portland Trailblazers. Obviously, I was a really big fan of both. I was a really big fan of this Portland Trailblazers team, but I never really understood the hype about him. I never thought of him as one of the 5 best point guards in the NBA. The shot was butter. The defense was always a question mark. So, and then later on, health became a question mark. So, he had a long, successful career, but I could make an argument that for a 7th overall pick, he either completely flatlined in terms of expected value or slightly underperformed it. Morris Peterson out of Michigan State, in 2000, the 21st overall pick, was part of some very, very good Raptor moments. Forget about the slap with Vince, but also, this was one of the 2 best players on that historic run that the Raptors had without Vince Carter once Vince Carter shut it down for the season, and the Raptors ended up facing the Detroit Pistons before Chris Childs forgot the score. And I just think this is the type of player that, a seasoned college player who comes in right away. He's a 3-and-D guy. Defense probably a little bit overrated, but I think he carved out a very good career for someone who was picked 21st overall. 2011, Jonas Valanciunas, 5th overall. I could put Jonas a little bit lower on this list, but I could also put him higher. I think he deserves a lot of credit for adjusting to the modern NBA. He didn't really come in shooting threes, but he's become one of the better 3-point shooting bigs in the NBA. The rebounding has always been great. The feet have always been, it's an interesting thing. Jonas and Andrea have a lot in common in the sense that they kind of were better athletes. When you saw their tape in Europe, when it was either for Andrea and Benetton Treviso or even Jonas Valanciunas in Lithuania, you saw fluidity, you saw athleticism, you saw a bit of burst, and they were just asked to bulk up. And, I think that's just what we did with centers back then. And I think that there's a different world in which he's a better player than he turned out to be. I think he's just very slow-footed and sluggish. And I wonder, because I remember seeing a clip of him right around the time he was drafted of him just dancing. And he was dancing with this woman. And it was just so incredible how nimble he was. This is one of the most appealing things about him. And to turn him into this guy who's not as nimble, it feels like a strength and training and development failure more than anything else. Jakob Poeltl, the 9th overall pick, went 1 pick ahead of Domantas Sabonis. Sabonis obviously finished with some MVP and All NBA votes this year, so it's hard to put Jakob any higher. But I think he's been a very serviceable role player and not much else. I could put him lower than Morris Peterson. I could put him higher than Morris Peterson. Please don't take these rankings all too seriously. These are supposed to be like tiers, and we can debate up and down. I fully expect Christian Koloko to leapfrog him at some point. But I think the best is still yet to come with Jakob. There might still be a couple of years of really, really, really high-end performance. And if you're looking at the value replacement, through a few years now between San Antonio and not playing a hell of a lot in Toronto in his first few years, 8.3 is very impressive, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of his career he's approaching 17, 18, 19, maybe even 22 in terms of value of replacement. So I think he was really good. Number 9, Marcus Camby, the Camby man. He didn't stay for very long. He was dealt in a trade for Charles Oakley, and I'm sure at the time, a lot of people can debate whether that was the right move, wrong move. I mean, obviously, at the time, Glenn Grunwald wanted to support Vince Carter and his evolution and his development. But I do wonder what could have been with Marcus Camby. He often struggled with staying healthy, but he was easily one of the 5, 6 best centers in the NBA for a while. And he was a huge part of that New York team that made it all the way to the finals, despite being an 8th seed. And, he was a starting center on that team. So, he provided a really elite shot blocking package and rebounding. I think the shot was a little funky, but it was pretty effective. I think he was a great center. Like, I think, it's not terrible value to get at number 2. I think relatively speaking, he probably underperformed the value of number 2 pick. So you could probably even slide him all the way down to 20 and be like, okay, well, because of role player and offense or whatever, he didn't do that well. But I think 2.3 box plus minus on an average year is very good. That's close to all-star level production throughout his career. And I think that regardless of how many minutes he played or games he played or whatever, I think that he had a long career relative to how it started out, and I think he deserves some credit for that. That was, I'd be remiss if I did not mention that was the year that the Raptors were supposed to pick number 1, but because of the expansion rules, they couldn't pick number 1. But had they been able to pick number 1, I wonder if they still would have picked Camby over Allen Iverson. But it was considered the Allen Iverson draft, and we think about what could have been with AI in Toronto. That would have been cool. Okay, moving into the top 10, we have elite value, and this is going to be a little bit debatable because OG Anunoby and Scotty Barnes are still on the upswing, and we don't know what Scotty's career is going to turn out to be. I think the returns on the first year were incredible. I think the returns on the second year are pretty decent. I mean, the fact that he already has 11.6 win shares in his first 2 years, if he just keeps that up for, I don't know, 10 years, if he doesn't regress and he doesn't become any better and he doesn't become any worse, and he just keeps giving you 5 to 6 win shares every single year, I mean, he climbs up this list pretty fast, right? But obviously, if you're a Raptor fan, you're expecting that win share number to climb to 10, 12, 13, 14 per year. You're expecting that box plus minus number to still slowly climb to 3, 4, 5. And obviously, you want that value replacement number to go up as well as he starts racking up all-star appearances. I think the potential is still sky high for him. Chris Bosh at number 8, honestly, going 1 pick ahead of Dwayne Wade, who had an infinitely better career, does dock him some points here. But you can't fault it. He's a Hall of Famer. You got him at number 4. I think he's pretty much, had his career not been cut short, I think he's easily a lot higher on this list. And you naturally couldn't have known about the blood clots and the career shortening at the time of drafting him. But obviously, this is going to all factor into this equation. And this is why this is so inexact, because there's a very good chance that we look down and say Chris Bosh did have a better career than Scotty, and a better career than OG, and a better career than so-and-so. And, it makes sense. OG Anunoby, somewhat of a weird thing, right? His high highs, low lows, right? So one of my favorite players, obviously, I'm rating him a little bit low here, but it's just because, he has been in the league for 6 years now. And this is, it's obviously well above what you'd expect from a 23rd overall pick, but it's not that crazy. Like, you have to look at a guy like DeLon Wright to put this into perspective, right? Drafted 2 years before, has like twice the value of a replacement, has a much higher box plus minus. I think his entire package, DeLon Wright, and despite the fact that DeLon Wright has often not played he's not played anywhere near as many minutes as OG. So, both players have been injury prone, have had a slew of injuries, but you could make a very realistic case that OG Anunoby has just been adored by the media, and DeLon Wright has somewhat been ignored by the media. And one of the biggest reasons I wanted to make this list is just to point out just how great DeLon Wright has been for the Raptors. He's not often seen as a big Raptors success story. He was just a toss-in a trade that got them a championship. He went, to Memphis and that Marc Gasol trade. But man, in a different world, if you don't have Fred VanVleet, in that undrafted heap, if he doesn't come up behind Kyle Lowry, there is a very realistic world in which DeLon Wright is the better player. He gets the development reps and all that. But per my understanding, he didn't want to be here after and that's a big reason why they traded him. And you wonder. There's some players where you say, okay, everything that could have gone right went right for that player. For DeLon Wright, it feels like everything that could have gone wrong for that player kind of went wrong for that player. I think he was a better player than what he's performed so far, and I just think that it's worth noting that he's performed so well. DeMar DeRozan, the engine that never stops, right? I think you have to look at this from the perspective of points versus impact. His defensive impact has never been great. His offensive impact has sometimes been inconsistent. You have to respect the fact that, someone who was picked 9th overall has managed to secure all NBA honors, all-star honors, is one of the most respected players in the league. It's obviously one of my favorite players in the NBA. I was heartbroken when he was traded. But, the impact has not been exceptionally high relative to a 9th overall pick. It's been good. It's certainly higher than the average 9th overall pick, but it is not like exceedingly higher. And there's another Raptors 9th overall pick that had a significantly bigger and better career. And I think that in these moments, it's good to realize that these things don't scale on a linear sense, right? Like you can't say that, okay, well, because basketball is such a complex sport and there's only 5 players on the court. And so if you can even get one MVP level season from a player or something close to it, I'm going to call it an MVP level season. I'm going to call it like a low MVP level season. So I think from the analytics perspective, a low MVP level season would be like 7.4 value replacement, all the way up to the crazy heights that guys like Nikola Jokic and Shaq have hit, which is like 12. And if you can get that type of peak value for even a season, I think it trumps, 3 years of role player at 2 value replacement. You know what I mean? So I think DeMar gets docked a little bit for just always being on the cusp of being a big time star, but never quite being a big time star. He's just kind of eked it out. You can look at a guy like Allen Iverson and you can dock him for maybe not having as long a career or as stable a career. And maybe his highs were higher, but his lows were lower. But it's like, I'll take those high highs, because in those years where you have one player who can give you that top level of impact, your contention window opens up so much. And so that's why you tend to swing for upside in the draft. And now, controversy. I think most people are probably expecting me to have listed Pascal Siakam already because they think I hate the guy or whatever. But here we go. Number 3, Pascal Siakam from New Mexico State, 27th overall pick in 2016. Look, I think people consider him the greatest draft pick because, the numbers, like the stats, like the raw stats are great. Like the points, rebounds, assists, they're so great. And, the all-star berths, the all-NBA stuff, right? But he hasn't done this for very long. And I think that's worth noting. He's almost 29 years old. It's also worth noting the career trajectory maps out to a guy who probably ends up with like a 22 value replacement career, maybe 21, 20. And it's just significantly lower than some of the guys who are ahead of him on this list. And yeah, you can say 27th overall pick, bro. Like, I mean, you're not expecting to get an all-star or an all-NBA guy, but I think this is where accolades can get too much, right? Because Pascal has enjoyed the greatest level of stability under Masai, Nurse. Again, when you talk about best possible development development stories and worst possible, Pascal's had the best possible development story, right? He's worked hard. The team around him has made sense. They built around him. They compensated him. They put the ball in his hands. They cleared out all obstructions. Players have had to sort of adjust their positions, like OG, Scotty, etc. They'll play center. They'll play small forward. They'll play off the ball, whatever, in order to accommodate. And so when you have an organization that believes in you this much, you're going to be much more likely to be successful. And I think when your organization is stable, when everything that they did with him from the G League 905 and, building him up slowly, giving him all those reps in his rookie year, Pascal Siakam is what happens when development goes right. It is a perfect development story. And it's easy for me to just look back and say, well, it worked out well, so they did it right. No, I think sometimes you do it right and it doesn't go well. And he deserves a lot of credit for putting in the work. But I think sometimes you do it wrong, and it's obvious you did it wrong. And I think that's where, 1998 and 1997 come in. Two fantastic picks, probably two of the greatest players of all time. And Vince Carter, the 5th overall pick, traded on draft night for Anton Jameson. I mean, put Toronto on the map. That's a common thing that's ascribed to him, but it's true, man. There was an entire year where Vince Carter led the entire league in value replacement. Like, I think that's worth noting. Like, it was a very watered down NBA after Michael Jordan retired, in the year that he did it, I think it was 2001. But it's worth noting that if value replacement is MVP, right? Because typically there's a correlation, strong correlation between winning MVP. If Vince Carter does 2001 one more time, like if he just builds on that 5%, he wins MVP in 2002. That's crazy. Like, that's where he was before the injuries took over. Like, he was right on the precipice of it. And so he gets a lot of credit for just the longevity of his career, right? It's impossible for me to think that any other player on this list, including Scotty, including Grady Dick, or one of the younger guys, is going to play 1,500 games in the NBA. They're going to play till 43. I mean, the value that this guy provided over his career was pretty incredible. Now we talk about a guy who played almost half as many games as Vince, well, slightly more than half as many games as Vince, but his high was just so incredible. And he was picked later in the draft. And so my greatest draft pick in Raptors history, in terms of just pure value, where he was picked relative to the players around him, is Tracy McGrady. Not a player that I actually like. So I'm a little bit bummed that he has to go number 1 on this list. I would have loved to put someone like Vince or someone like Scotty, ahead of him, but I can't with a straight face. Tracy McGrady's career was incredible. And yet, also one of those disaster stories of development, right? Didn't really get the ball enough in his first few years in Toronto, goes to Orlando, gets the ball too much, gets Doc Rivers as a head coach. So he goes from Butch Carter to Doc Rivers. And, it's kind of weird sometimes, when people talk about the Phil Jackson effect on Michael and Kobe's career, and they talk about how LeBron pretty much had to teach himself. And of course, that's massively disrespectful to all the coaches that LeBron's had throughout his career. But you do have to understand that coaching, development, teammates, system, organization have such an influence on the type of career that a player could have. And Tracy McGrady is just so freaking talented. 6'8", explosive, long arms, incredible defender, shot blocker, rebounder, passer. His passing is so off the charts that you think to yourself, this guy got a little bit more guidance, a little bit more accountability, and a little bit more structure, and a roster that really made sense. If we have Grant Hill not bust his foot in Orlando and Tim Duncan goes to Orlando, does Tracy McGrady win like 4 championships in Orlando, play less of a load having to carry a team with Mike Miller? Does he end up one of the 10 greatest players of all time? Easily. And he's the only player on this list that has, in my opinion, apart from, maybe Scotty someday, he's the only player on this list that has a case that at his peak, he was on a real pipeline to being one of the 10 greatest players of all time. His heights were so high, and unfortunately, I think injuries, stability, too many minutes, too few minutes. You think about all the time. You think about Kobe Bryant's statement that had the Toronto Raptors stayed together with Vince and Tracy, that they probably would have faced them in the finals the next year. And I firmly believe that to be the case. You saw what was building. And they've both talked about it now, how much they regret that. And Vince was so pissed at the time when, Tracy chose to go to Orlando. They didn't talk for a little while. And it's cool that they talk now, and it's water under the bridge. But for Raptor fans, it's probably the greatest what if in Raptor history, and for good reason. And it's funny because if you believe the rumors that, Tracy just wanted to go home, which, have been sort of debunked by him as well. He really loved Toronto and he liked Toronto. He didn't really hate it here or anything. He just kind of wanted his own team. And I'll always remember Vince Carter saying he could have had his own team here. Vince would have deferred. Tracy would have been the alpha. But this organization under Richard Petty and, MLSE at the time just saw Vince as a cash cow. They wanted to push him and all the commercials. They wanted to make him bigger than the team. And it's funny because you had one of the greatest players in the NBA and one of his teammates was showing all the signs in the world that he could be much better than him. And it reminds me a lot of the Pascal and Scotty thing right now, to be honest with you, on a much muted level, because the talent that Tracy had was immense. Vince was further along. His skills were further along. Tracy was a lot more raw. His jump shot had further to go. Maybe he wasn't as obvious an athlete. He was a little bit skinny. But man, like the passing was the difference, right? The passing, playmaking, how he felt the game, how he saw the game, how slow things were for him. And Jack Armstrong has actually talked about how Scotty Barnes reminds him of a young Tracy McGrady. And obviously they're very different athletes and very different types of athletes. And Tracy had more of a handle, but there's a lot of similarities and a lot of parallels there. So I really hope this has been interesting for y'all. Yeah, I'm gonna read some comments. I got 99 comments here. I'm sure a lot of people disagree, and you can let me know in the comments below once this video goes live where you disagree. Okay. Okay. Goes to Jurassic. The Grady what? Okay, come on, man. Scotty will be in the closest as long as Siakam is around. Closet as long as... Okay. Hello, Rob. Been doing a bunch of Siakam mock trades. There's a bunch of possibilities out there. The Raptors have many realistic options. They're willing to move him, to be honest. I don't know about realistic, but they certainly have options. There are a lot of teams that could use him. We won't make the playoffs if we run it back. I disagree. We will make the playoffs if we run it back, for sure. Is Grady going to be an all-star? I wouldn't bet for it. I wouldn't bet against it, but it's certainly in the realm of possibilities. I don't mean to sound like a magic 8-ball, like ask again later, but ask again later. It'll be really interesting to see how much he buys into what Darko wants him to do on offense. I think you can keep it simple for him in the first year. You expand his role out, but if he buys into it, man, like he has a path to be good for sure. Okay. Siakam wants to stay for his Supermax. Certainly, and I think that is somewhat of an understated part of next year's conundrum of bringing this whole thing back is, you have a guy who desperately needs to get off the ball a little bit more and sacrifice his numbers. But if the team starts losing, you wonder if he'll do that given what's on the line for him. Now, I really don't think, even if he qualifies for the Supermax, that he should get the Supermax. I know that sounds pretty controversial to some people, and it's pretty expected that, if a player qualifies for it, you usually give it. But I think the extenuating circumstances here with Siakam is he'll be 30 at the time. He's not a superstar. He's not a top 10, top 15 player. And so you end up in this weird situation where you pay a guy and you're in the Bradley Beal situation all over again, right? You're in the Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal thing. And listening more to the Brandon Miller stuff about, they really, really wanted LaMelo to sign the extension. He didn't want to sign an extension if Scoot was going to be there. I'm just like, bro, building around the wrong player is the biggest disaster for a team. I would much rather you trade the player and start from scratch. And I know that can be really disappointing for a fan base that's used to getting to the 5th seed, 6th seed, and getting knocked out in the playoffs because they're like, whatever, a bird in the hand is better than one in the bush. I just simply disagree. From a team building perspective, the lottery gives you a great chance to add top end talent. Look at the top end of this lottery. You have a player like Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, guys like this. They have clear pathways to being MVP level candidates or MVP level players, and I think you bat on that upside as opposed to betting the whole farm and 45, 50, $55 million on a guy who doesn't have that upside. It's not to say that Pascal Siakam is not a good player. I always get misquoted in my perspective on this. I just don't think he's worth the Supermax. I don't think he's worth the max. I tried it on Fanspo. So based on his analytics profile, I tried to sign Pascal Siakam to a new contract, and they said based on performance, and then they started the contract at $24 million. And I think that's about fair. $25 to $30 million is about fair. There's usually a bit of upside baked into a contract. And then once players get older, there's legacy and downside baked into the contract. And so you'll notice also injury history baked into the contract. He hasn't necessarily been very healthy over the last 3 years. So I think there's so much to factor in before extending him to a supermax. But I also think there's a lot to factor in, and the Raptors should factor it in, about allowing him to go into a year with that hanging over his head, because it's a lot of pressure for him as well. Absolutely. Side note, Masai robbing the Bucks blind with the Vasquez trade is the funniest trade. I agree. That was crazy. He is certainly one of them. Jeremiah couldn't shoot. You could also say Pascal couldn't shoot, but the shooting potential was there. They weren't total non-shooters. It's not like Jeremy Grant just went from total non-shooter to a guy who can shoot the lights out. No, there was shooting potential there. Just because a guy doesn't have that role in college to take high volume threes doesn't mean they can't expand it. It doesn't mean that you as a scout don't have an obligation to do the due diligence to go into the tape and see, could they shoot in high school when they had a different role? What are their mechanics like? Bring them in, do some drills, figure it out. You know, I mean, it's the same reason that I believe Christian Koloko can shoot, and I don't think he hit like 2 threes last year. So every comment section results in Fred and Pascal Take. Good point. Would DeMar be the best draft pick with what he did in Toronto, on top of the fact that he was the main piece in the Kawhi trade? No. I don't think that factors in at all for me. Don't underestimate how much has been lost over the last 3 years, right? I think it's difficult to just say you can undo that and you can write a blank slate. But I do think that for players, you know, like Malachi Flynn, Jeff Doughton, Delano Banton, it's very important that they buy in. It's really important. I think it changes how you work. I think it changes how you develop. I think it just changes your pipeline. He talked about, Darko Rajakovic talked about how you can't really see what the development is like if you don't get them time on the court. So there need to be moments. There needs to be a plan in place. Like if I'm going to just put my coaching hat on for a second. Let's say I'm talking to, I'm going to pretend for a second that I'm going to have a conversation with a few of the Raptors draft picks, or not draft picks, prospects. I say right in training camp or even in summer league to Grady Dick, right? And be like, okay, our role for you as of right now, provided the roster does not change drastically, is for you to come off the bench and give us 20 minutes. I want you to shoot whenever you're open. I want you to pass when you're doubled. And when defenses close out on you, because they will close out on you, I need you to make a drive, get to the rim, or make a pass out of the roll. On defense, I need you to try your best. We're going to hide you. And I need you to rebound to compensate for your lack of defense, which means you might have to switch down on a 4. I need you to box out. I need you to be the most active player. Can you do this for me? If you do this for me, by the time the playoffs come around, I will consider moving you into the starting lineup. And by next year, we're going to do a strength and conditioning program for you all summer. We're going to get you stronger. We're going to work on your lateral quickness. We're going to move up those muscles. And by next year, I want you to be the 3rd or 4th option in this offense. We're going to see how you can take it from there. You see that pipeline? It makes it so simple. In my opinion, you're not giving them way too much to focus on. This is a very manageable stuff. I'm not saying you're going to be a pick and roll ball handler. No, I mean, there's nothing there that's overly complicated or overly frustrating or unrealistic. I think this sets the expectation. This is what I need. And expectations are so important because you can't really hold people accountable if there aren't expectations. You need to set the expectation, and then they have to agree to the expectation, right? You have to also ask them, what is your role? What do you want to do this year, right? What do you do well? Like, I mean, obviously know what you do well, but what do you think you do well? What do you want to work on? And so, you know, if Grady's like, I want to guard, you know, the best player, let's give him a chance. Let's give him a chance to fail. And maybe he doesn't fail. Maybe he's got, like, give him that challenge. Be open-minded about it, right? And now when he fails, he'll know that you at least tried, that you were open enough to allow him to fail. And that's important. You can't just shut it down. The minute you shut it down, you shut down the communication. And I think that this is such an important part of leadership. And I think this is an important part of coaching. Okay. Like maybe against the Pistons and then revisit it. If he fails early, a couple months later, talk to him before the game against the Pistons and say, hey, we're probably going to win this game, but would you like to take 6 minutes on Cade Cunningham? We want you to have 6 minutes on Cade Cunningham, and I want to see how far your defense has come. This creates a real workflow throughout the year, in my opinion. And this is how you build a prospect up instead of tearing them down. We are not. I mean, he had a lengthy career. He was picked 20th overall. I think if you compared him to every player who was ever picked 20th overall, he was not by any means the worst. He was not by any means the best. He was pretty slightly below average. Perhaps. You had Malachi twice. I'm guessing Caboclo should be there in place of one of those. Did I? Hang on. Did I really miss Bruno Caboclo here? How did I do that? Hang on. Oh, Bruno is number 32. My bad, y'all. Just completely missed them. I apologize. That's hilarious. Wow. Yes, Bruno was 32. So I clearly missed him on the cut and paste there from the Excel spreadsheet. My bad. This is for total career. I don't think there's any case to make for Pascal Siakam being number 2. Over Vince as a career? No. I mean, I don't say any case because you can argue the championship for sure. For sure. But I just think that Vince doesn't get enough credit for how shit the front office was. Fred was not drafted. Agreed. Yes, he was. He was a top 5 player for like 6-7 years in the NBA. That's well, I don't know, 5 years. I think from 2001 all the way till 2006, you can make a really strong case for Tracy McGrady being one of the top 5 to 7 players in the NBA. It's a pretty sustained peak. I don't think DeLon was that good. I think he was really good. Where would I put Fred if he was drafted like second round? Like if Fred was drafted 59th? I think he'd be second or third on this list. Maybe second. Like that would be insane value. Like Fred VanVleet as an undrafted player relative to what he's done, like and I assure you his analytics like would be super different if he was starting from day one or something like that, because he's always been an analytics darling. Even back in Wichita State, he was an analytics darling, but his impact on winning is unquestionable. So I think he could be third. I think he would bump Pascal. They can be, but in this case, I agree with them. That's true. But you just don't know. Like I'm not saying that Malachi Flynn can magically turn into, some elite draft recovery story or, development, but I don't see like I see a lot of potential in him when I see him in summer runs. I know that pro-am games should not be taken at face value, but when I see him going up against, there's something that holds him back mentally, and I wonder if a change of scenery and a coach, like he's the one guy where I'm like, could he blow up? Could he be like a 10, 12 point per game scorer and come out of nowhere for you? He is online for a contract as well, so I don't know. That's something that remains to be seen. I wouldn't. Goran Dragic was a much better player than Malachi Flynn through his first few years. Not even close. Failure is a part of growth. If you don't have young guys opportunity to fail, you don't allow them to grow. Agreed. Vince all the way. Vince killed his career in Dallas and Memphis. I think he just had a different value structure. I think he really cared about playing the game. I think he really cared about helping his young teammates. I noticed this even in New Jersey when he had Devin Harris, with him. And I remember Devin talking extensively about what an impact Vince has made on him as a leader and how selfless he is and just what a great person he is. So where would you rank Lucas Nogueira? Well, in fairness, we didn't draft him. The Atlanta Hawks drafted him. We did trade for him, but I believe it was a year later, so I'm not counting it. He would be really, 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 really bottom out. Like he would be in the very bottom list. I feel sick. I don't like it. Rob, you're forgetting Goran's early years. Am I? Okay, let's check. By year 2, Goran Dragic was. Let me just put this to perspective for you. Actually, hang on. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. And I think that this is going to leave you flabbergasted. Okay, here. So here's Goran Dragic's entire career in a nutshell, right? If you look at this category here, sorry, what the hell? Right? We're talking about this pretty much. This is Malachi's career to date. You have a 1.9 box plus minus season, a 1.7 box plus minus season, 1.7 value replacement season, which is absolutely mentally, like, that's crazy. Per 100 possessions, you see really good numbers here. I mean, at 24 years old, granted, he only played 378 minutes, but he shot 51% from three, man. Like, you got to be kidding here. Like, he was an occasional starter, and then by the time he was 25 years old, he became a halftime starter, and by the time he was 26, he was a full-time starter, and he stayed full-time starter, and then became an all-star at 31. I mean, you cannot be comparing this career to Malachi Flynn's. Just to put this into perspective, here's Malachi Flynn, and I promise you there's nothing even remotely promising about Malachi Flynn's entire career thus far, apart from bursts, bits, and pieces. So scoring averages, per 100 possessions, complete flat line. Assists have gone down every single year per 100 possessions. Steals have gone down every single year per 100 possessions. Blocks have flatlined. Turnovers have been somewhat in this range. He's become a little less turnover prone. Fine. The three-point percentage has been steadily climbing from 32 to 35%. This is not the ascent you need for a guy who is undersized. And the field goal percentage has been always under 40%. And you're talking about a player who through 3 years in the NBA has never shot over 40% from the field. Talking about advanced stats. I mean, come on, man. Like, this is, and I'm not trying to shit on Malachi, and I like him, but this is one of the worst players in the NBA. Like, by far, one of the worst players in the NBA. Negative 4.1 box plus minus, negative 0.4 value replacement. for such few minutes to have such a negative impact on the analytics is absolutely insane. So look, you're gonna compare him to, you know, certain players, fine, but please do not compare him to Goran Dragic. This is a completely, just to refresh again your perspective on who Goran was. Like, he shot like he's shooting 45% from the, like, do you think if in his second year Malachi had shot 45% from the field and 39% from three, that he wouldn't like massively be playing major rotation minutes for you? This is a bad take, man. I absolutely disagree with you. I don't know about that, man. But Nick Nurse killed this dude. Okay, well, I mean, that is the hope. That is absolutely the hope, that was, you know, that's the only problem here, that this is not about Malachi being too small. This is not about Malachi being too not working hard enough. This is not about Malachi just simply not being an NBA caliber player. But I tell you right now, like, this is a dude who is fighting for his NBA life, because his next contract will not be a guaranteed contract. If he keeps this up, one more year of this, I tell you, that's it. That's curtains on his NBA career. There aren't exactly a ton of, like, guards are coming into the league all the time. And if I'm a rival general manager and I see that you have made this level of impact through 4 years, and now you won't even have the excuse of, oh, it's just Nick Nurse. If he keeps doing this, then it'll be okay. It's across 2 different coaches, 2 different coaching systems on a team that hasn't been very good at all during the time. By the way, that's another thing. It's one thing when you're Peyton Pritchard and your numbers are not. I mean, to put this into perspective, I mean, everyone talks about, oh my God, you know, you picked him over Desmond Bane, and let me not even compare the Desmond Bane, you know, analytics, but take a look at Peyton Pritchard. Share my screen again. He has never shot under 30%, so under 40% from the field. He shot 41% from three, which is the same percentage from three that Grady Dick shot. Well, better than the same percentage that Grady Dick shot from college. He did that in the NBA. So Malachi is significantly worse, like across the board. He had already, you know, in his second year, he had a significant box plus minus season of 1.8. So in this case, you know, everything is just lining up here. He shot incredibly from the line on his career. He's 89% free throw shooter. In terms of his defensive impact, he's pesky as hell, man. And he's a better defender than Malachi Flynn. So look, like I just, everyone talks about Desmond Bane. And, you know, I mean, just to cross compare this, you want to see Desmond Bane's? I mean, that's just nuts. So here's Desmond Bane. This is an all-star season, per my estimation, even though he didn't make the all-star team. Third year is pretty much an all-star season. Same age as Malachi. I think he's a year younger or exactly the same age as Malachi. And then per 100 possessions, I mean, my God, man, he's averaging 32 points. He's averaging double the clip at 12% more efficiency from field. And again, another 40% three-point shooter, a guy who has never shot below 40%. Right? You have one guy who's never shot above 40% from the field in his entire career. You have another guy who's never shot below 40% from three in his entire career. The gap between Malachi and Desmond Bane is not one pick. It's like 100 picks. It's crazy. So again, Malachi's got a really long way to go if he wants to, let's call it, redeem his NBA career. But he's been arguably a worse player than Delano Banton. I mean, they're both worse players than Jeff Doughton, who I believe went undrafted. So just to put that into perspective. BPM is awful, though. It's not awful, actually. It's not awful at all. You can lean into EPM if you want, but in most cases, all plus minus stats and all of these box score stats are deriving information in different ways from the same exact thing. It's focusing on the exact same thing. Okay, you're never going to find, I don't think you're ever going to find a player other than Fred VanVleet who shoots so consistently bad from the field who has really good analytics. You're just not. Every time they benched Doughton, they force-fed Flynn minutes. Like, they didn't want to be seen giving Doughton any upper hand. I mean, they exhausted all of Doughton's games played for his two-way contract. I hope that they learned that lesson, and this year he'll get a full contract. He's been in Toronto, so he's obviously part of the plans. I don't think he has some exceptional trade value. So, yeah, I think Jeff Doughton will have a crack, or at least a shot at being the primary backup point guard. And if Fred VanVleet comes back, maybe it won't be as clear a path. But, you know, I think he vibes with the young core. I think he's a really good player, and with so many guys who need the ball in their hands, to have a guy like Jeff Doughton coming off the bench who doesn't, it's great. I don't know if he's a starter, but his defense is incredible, and he's always going to be, in my opinion, like a fifth starter. He doesn't really have necessarily the dynamic game to sort of break you off the dribble very much, but I think he's a better shooter. I saw a lot of that in the G League last year from him for the 905. Like, he's so good. He's so good. He's too good for the G League. Like, in his matchup against Scoot Henderson, he was better than him, like easily better than him. Like, he was really good. So he's been in the G League too long. You know, it's just a guy who needs to take the next step up. He's kind of caught between worlds right now where he's not good enough to be a starter in the NBA, maybe, and he's just way too good to be starting in the G League. So I don't know. I hope that he takes the next step forward. I really like him a lot. Grady Dick, day one starter. I'm very confident that's what happens. Well, according to Bobby Webster, they see him coming off the bench, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I don't think they're going to start him over Gary Trent Jr. That would be pretty hard to imagine. But, you know, if he does start, whether he starts or he doesn't start, I don't think he's getting more minutes than Gary Trent Jr. Could you compare and contrast Noel and Isaiah Thomas? Okay, sure. Let's check it out here. So, I mean, from a straight shot perspective, one thing that's really worth noting is that one sec. One thing that's really worth noting is that Isaiah is 3 inches taller. So right off the bat, you know, there's a little bit of a disadvantage there. So I'll show you Isaiah's stats at Washington, and then I'll point to Marquise Noel. So here's Isaiah's numbers at Washington, right? So ignore strength of schedule for a second. Let's just look at per 100. I apologize for all the ads. This basketball reference is insane for everything here. So just compare the final year. So 8.1 box plus minus in his final year, 5.5 win shares, 26% usage, you know, pretty decent across the board. I think as a shooter, he was elite. He was not elite as a shooter, which was really one of the biggest question marks coming in. He had a lot of quickness, right? He had a lot of quickness and athleticism, but again, his size made it difficult, and his shooting made it even more difficult. He did take a ton of threes, and, you know, per 100 possessions, taking 10 threes as a sophomore, and then 8.5 as a senior. I believe it's not quite Grady Dick level of like volume shooting, but it's up there. He got to the line a lot too. I think they have a lot in common. So to look at Marquise Noel, I can tell you just before even looking, the Marquise's analytics were better. And he played for a really good team. He played for Kansas State, and, you know, he's a little bit older. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he is 23 years old. You know, that's his final year at Kansas State, and, you know, he had a massive tournament. So his numbers across the board are a little bit better. The 3-point attempt rate is great. Here, one sec. Per 100 possessions, he attempted a few more threes than him. He made them at a higher clip. it's been a little bit rocky, right? The previous year, 30%, then 35.5%. I have questions about his shot. I have questions about his shot selection, but I have no questions about his shot. 89% from the free throw line. He's an elite shooter. It's just, you wonder if a guy like this got a lot of attention, because obviously he was the best player on his team at Kansas State, one of the best players on his team at Kansas State. And so you wonder if with a little bit less attention at the NBA level, if he can, I don't know, make a little bit more of an impact, but there's just bigger size. I don't know. I don't know. Like, him making the league and being a player in the NBA that actually gets minutes is almost like Muggsy Bogues at 5'3". It's more, or Spud Webb at 5'5", right? There have been a few guys in league history who've been able to overcome the odds of, being vertically challenged. And if there was ever a roster that could compensate for somebody who's very vertically challenged, or not vertically challenged, height challenged, it is this team, because they have so many long players around them. But the problem is that the league has gotten so much bigger. And so there will always be cross matching in the post and whatever. And then you'll always have to send a double. And, but if he can make up for it with crazy elite deep 3-point shooting, and he can get to the point where his 3-point shooting is like 40% on like deep catches, maybe he could be a guy who gets specialty run. I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around the concept of a 5'7" point guard in the NBA. That's crazy. Like, the first thing I told my girlfriend was the Raptors just signed a guy who's your height, and it's just crazy looking at my girlfriend. I'm just like, wow, like, you're significantly shorter than me. You're gonna play in the NBA. That's crazy. So if he makes it, wow, that's incredible, right? But that's it's hard to imagine. Hard to imagine he'll get like rotational minutes. And obviously, I'm a really big fan of Jeff Doughton. I don't see how you give him minutes over Jeff Doughton, but I would love to see him develop with the 905, and I think it'll be a lot of fun. And whereas in the 905, I don't think that the obstacles to success will be as daunting, because I don't think the athletes are as good, and I don't think like the competition is as good. And JJ Barea part 2. JJ was not 5'6". JJ was 5'10". I believe he was 5'10". So yes, there have been undersized guards. Yes, it has happened before, but they have to be great shooters. And I think his pathway to becoming a great shooter is clearer and easier than Isaiah Thomas's was. So that's, welcome to the Pascal hate group. Really? I don't like you. I just really genuinely don't like you. I don't understand why any human being on the planet would ever watch content that they hate as much as you watch this channel. I can tell you you're a very, very sad person. Like, a very pathetic and sad person. I cannot imagine. Like, I tell you, like I hate watching content this much is bad for your mental health. So personally, for your sake, I hope that I never see one of your comments again. You've been generally annoying, but still respectful enough that I don't have to block you. Like, I've never blocked you, but it's like, chill. You know what I mean? Anyways, all right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. What a sour note to end it on. I don't know why I respond to the trolls, right? Like, it's just, exactly. I need to get better at this somehow. Yeah. I noticed that. Let me tell you a funny anecdote to sort of end this off. There was a call for casting on a Facebook group yesterday, and I saw it, and it was posted like 7-8 times. And I got to tell you, it was a little bit triggering, I think, for a lot of people to just see it. First of all, it was a call for background, everyone background, whatever. It was unpaid. And then they had these groups of backgrounds, like they needed patrons, they needed drug dealers, they needed, restaurateurs, they needed all these people. And sometimes when you're making an independent film, you can't pay background. And I totally understand that. Big productions sometimes pay $50 for background. I totally get it. If a smaller production can't pay background. You just ask for people, hey, you want to be part of a movie? You want to spend 4 hours? Boom, come do it. Totally fair, totally fine. I did it myself. What pissed a lot of people off was they had drug dealers, Black or Hispanic, restaurateurs, any ethnicity, this thing, any ethnicity, criminals, Black or Hispanic. And it was just like, I think every white person had the exact same idea. This is super racist. How can you, you know? And so this person was posting this, and they were not posting it as a person. They were posting it as a brand. And everyone just started spamming like, this is wrong. How can you do this? Unpaid work, racial discrimination, etc. Everyone started getting really political and really angry about it. So I decided to check out like what the brand was, like who are these people? And it was something like Spoo U TV or something. I don't want to give them any press or pub or anything like that, but I looked at it, and the entire brand is African American run. Like the founder is Black, the staff is Black, everyone's Black. So it's so hilarious to me that everyone got so angry and calling these people this and that, whatever. And yeah, like you can say, you know, my first thought was every drug dealer I've ever met was white. So it's like, why the stereotype? But obviously they're free to make their film however the hell they want. And everyone over politicized it, and every Karen in the world is like making this, you know. And what I appreciated about this person was not anything else. It was just a random observation, was how many people said horrible shit to them about how terribly racist they are. Just imagine without perspective and without concept, a string of white people calling a Black person racist for wanting to cast drug dealers as Black. You can argue it's problematic in that it perpetuates a stereotype, but I really don't think that you have a right to tell someone how to cast their fucking film because you're political. And what I admired about these people is they didn't respond to any of the hateful comments. Like they were just, and if they did, it was like one word, and it was very straight. They didn't tell everyone, be like, hey, we're Black, how can we be? They didn't do that. They didn't get angry. They did a great job. That was awesome. You know? So regardless of how you feel about their casting call or the fact that they're not paying, I mean, I just admired how well they responded to people saying things about them that probably aren't true. And so, you know, I've gotten triggered a couple times the last couple of days when people are saying like, you hated Grady Dick. And I get so angry because I'm just like, I didn't hate it, you know? And then someone in the comments yesterday was like, you put your head down for so long. Vegan Grass said that. And it pissed me off because I was just like, so long. My head was down for 30 seconds as I was trying to gather my thoughts. And I don't know. And it's like, why does this bother you? If it's not true, why the hell does it bother you? You know what I mean? Like, I try to imagine like what this person is experiencing on that end. They put up a casting call for, you know, they want drug dealers, and they're probably just sitting there like, yeah, okay. You know, they're probably laughing it off. So I got to learn to laugh shit like this off too, you know? Bro, chill on me. Yo, you said so long. Like, you need to say so long. You said so long. You know what I mean? Like, that's weird to me. I went back and I watched the clip on Basketball Zone, and it's like 35 seconds of just me putting my head down and recalibrating how I'm supposed to say this, because like, shocking, really shocking. He's not the type of prospect that I thought we were looking at. He wasn't available, whatever. And you just get into this mode of like, if I don't defend myself here, people are gonna take this the wrong way. People are gonna like mislabel, and then it's just like you wanna approach this from a stoic mindset of saying like, well, people's opinions of me are not my problem. I can't control it, so who fucking cares? But at the same time, then you have to deal with people on Twitter making entire threads about you saying that, you know, you have this opinion or that opinion and none of it's true. You know what I mean? So it's just, it's problematic. And sometimes I prefer to squash misinformation and rumors and shit like this before it gets out of hand. So I don't know how I plan to deal with this in the future, because obviously if this channel gets bigger, the trolls will get larger. And I'm not saying you're a troll. Obviously you're a supporter of this channel and you just, you know, thought what you thought, but I don't know. Why care about the Twitter trolls? It's a fair point. Why care? You know, if I had a kid today, I would tell them why care, but sometimes you care. Sometimes it matters. Sometimes it bothers you. It makes it touches on something, and you know, I think like sometimes it's good to pause and be like, these people have never met me. They don't know anything about me. They're trying to do this, and obviously, if you consistently, something I realized yesterday, the minute that I read one of your comments, it's not your comment, it was one of these comments of like, bruh, stop, you hated Grady Dick. That when I read that comment, I tell you, I was scrolling Instagram and I saw the thing that Sam Vecini said, and I immediately like went on the offensive. Like, how could he say that? And it was almost like shame deflection, you know, like someone's saying this about me and I got to say something about somebody else. It's just, it creates like a virus of negativity. And I don't want to contribute any more to negative talk, and I don't want to deal with negative people. So I want to just move on and I want to get better with this. Yeah. Kill them with kindness. That's a great, yeah. I hope Dick takes Scotty's spot just to see you turn on him. Cool. I hope you get serious psychological help. That somebody gives you a hug, maybe, that you can go back in time and maybe, I don't know, receive more love as a kid. Because as a person who, you know, probably didn't get enough love as a kid, I certainly identified in you. And, you know, I'm sorry that your life is so sad that you have to come to a channel and, you know, just like ruthlessly, like religiously. Like I have channels that I follow that I get a lot of value from, that I love, that I have never commented on the level. I miss their videos all the time. Like Thinking Basketball, I don't comment on all of Thinking Basketball, but I can tell you, regardless of whether I'm talking about Pascal or whether I'm not, you having a parasocial relationship with Pascal, and it's weird. I promise you, it's weird. Like, he does not need you to defend him every time his name is mentioned. Like, I can mention him in a positive light, negative light, it doesn't matter. And honestly, man, I gotta tell you, like, if your goal is for me to become more positive about Pascal Siakam, you failed, because the annoying nature of you and like two other fans, just like the consistent like rhetoric, is what makes this, like, it makes me honestly just want to prove you wrong. Like and I shouldn't be taking content direction from trolls, but sometimes like comments like this are like exactly why I like cannot stand people like you. To be honest, I was just being straight up with you, right? um how confident am I that Scotty will peak higher than Pascal Siakam? How confident? I'm more confident that Scotty Barnes will peak higher than Pascal Siakam than I am that the earth is round. Yeah. Straight up. All right. Talk to y'all later. Have a good one. Peace.